Hello, everyone. My name is Braden Crimmins, and today, on behalf of my co-authors, I'll be discussing with you DVSorder, a privacy flaw in Dominion voting machines that would allow passive observers to learn how other people voted. The secret ballot is a crucial election security mechanism in US elections. It ensures that voters can vote their conscience without being bribed or coerced, and it's protected by law in all 50 states. But right now, it is under some tension. That is because of ballot-level data, records that describe the votes on each individual ballot cast during an election. Jurisdictions have increasingly posted this data, and there are good reasons to do so, but it also carries a risk. If the data is not properly anonymized, it could reveal how particular people voted. DVSorder is a failure of anonymization in the ImageCast Precinct and ImageCast Evolution election machines manufactured by Dominion Voting Systems. These machines are used in 21 states, in Puerto Rico, and in parts of Canada. When a ballot is scanned into one of these machines, it is assigned a 6-digit ID. Dominion represents that these IDs are chosen at random, and that means that they are decoupled from voter order. But when we dug into the data, we seemed to notice some patterns. And eventually, after further analysis, we were able to completely break Dominion's pseudo-random number generator using only public information. It turns out that each machine uses the same fixed sequence of 1 million IDs, and it draws from this sequence in consecutive order. The only random element is the starting point in the list. The sequence is the obfuscated output of a linear congruential generator, a type of weak RNG that's been known to be insecure since the 1970s. And apparently aware that this generator's output wasn't random enough for them, Dominion decided to do a series of obfuscations. First, they applied a substitution cipher. They replaced all of the zeros in the output with ones, all of the zeros with fives, all of the ones with zeros, and so on. And then they also shuffled the order of the digits in the output, so that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 would become 2, 6, 1, 5, 3, 4. This generator is still weak. In fact, it's so weak that you can solve it with only a pen and paper. We show how you can do that in section 3 of our work, if you're interested. Once you know the sequence, or you know how to derive it, you can trivially unshuffle the ballots to determine the exact order in which they were cast. But how do we go from ballot order to de-anonymized ballots? Well, it turns out that the order in which people vote isn't treated as a secret in US elections. And there are a lot of different ways you can learn it. One of the simplest ways to do it is to use the public counter. Most election machines in the United States are configured to show the number of ballots that have been cast so far in the election, and anyone who can observe this number can learn the index of another voter's ballot. For example, suppose a man votes right after his wife and notes down that she cast the 72nd ballot. He could go, unshuffle the data, and learn how she voted after the election because of this flaw. There are also ways to attempt more wholesale privacy compromise. In many states, representatives of political parties have the legal right to learn voters' identity when they enter the polling place and to watch as they cast their ballot. They could use this to link every voter with the ballot that they cast. And even if you don't have someone stationed in the polling place in advance, in some jurisdictions, it turns out that you can FOIA all-day surveillance video footage of everyone who used the scanner. This means you could line up every ballot with footage of the voter who cast it. This image here is from one such video in Georgia. So that's the vulnerability. But the second half of the paper is about what happened after we discovered it. We conducted an extensive disclosure process to try and get the problem fixed. And along the way, we found things that reveal 3 persistent problems with the election sector's approach to security and privacy. The first of these issues concerns coordinated disclosure. We found the vulnerability in late July of 2022. And we knew that in just over 3 months, there would be another election where a lot more vulnerable data would be released. So we had to attempt to disclose this and get this problem fixed quickly. We knew we couldn't do nothing, so our next choice was to try and coordinate through federal entities. We reached out to CISA, asked if they would take it through the coordinated vulnerability disclosure process, and they said no. They told us that we should work directly with the vendor, or that we should coordinate with the affected jurisdictions themselves. So, after lawyering up, we reached out to Dominion. we sent a detailed written notification, and we called their CEO personally. We included proof of concepts, descriptions of the threat scenario, and the mitigations we recommended. We also offered to assist Dominion with solving the issue. About a week later, we got confirmation that they'd received our notification, but we never heard back besides that. Now, Dominion did send a notification to some of their customers, which you can see on the screen right here. There's a small issue with it, which is that it doesn't mention that there's a vulnerability. It says that jurisdictions should consult with their lawyers before they release additional data, but Dominion's customers were left to rely on the previous and inaccurate representations that the ballots were safely shuffled. A month after this, Dominion released an update to their advisory, which finally mentions that a flaw might exist. But it falsely implies that it might not exist, even a month after Dominion knew about the vulnerability and after they had ample time to check our work. And it misleadingly states that following the information described in the advisory mitigates any potential risk. At least to my reading, the closest they come to offering any mitigation information at all is consult with your lawyers. So, we knew that it also wouldn't be fruitful to work with the vendor, which left disclosing directly to the affected customers ourselves. So we sent out a 3-page letter to the chief election official in each of the affected states. This described the risks to voters, said how we would recommend mitigating it, offered our help to do that, and said that we would be issuing a public disclosure soon. Now, some states engaged constructively with this disclosure and stopped releasing vulnerable data. Other states did not engage quite so well. In fact, some appear to have not informed local affected jurisdictions that they were vulnerable. An example of this is San Francisco. San Francisco has long been a leader in transparency and routinely publishes ballot-level data following elections. We explicitly named them in our disclosures. But no one told San Francisco that they were vulnerable before the midterm election. And come election night, they began posting new data. When we were finally able to get in touch with San Francisco to warn them ourselves, they said that they had never heard from their state and that they couldn't understand the advisory they had gotten from Dominion. Now, a few years later, San Francisco, knowing about this flaw, attempted to sanitize their data, but did so incompletely and had another privacy compromise then. What are some takeaways here? Well, first, vendors should accept responsibility when they have flaws in their product, and they should convey accurate information to their customers. And second, the federal government should reliably coordinate disclosure for vulnerabilities in election systems. The second challenge I want to talk about is a challenge of effective mitigation. How do we fix a vulnerability once we know it exists? Now, DVSorder is a flaw that can be mitigated. The way you do it is you remove or replace the election IDs and you reshuffle the ballots before you release any data. We created an open source tool to do this for jurisdictions, and Dominion created a patch of their own. But Dominion incorporated their patch into a major update for their system, which required a lengthy federal review. This meant that their patch wasn't available to customers until 5 months after our public disclosure. We recommend in the future that vendors create discrete security patches that can be rapidly certified and installed onto their products. Georgia is one example of where mitigation has so far failed. The entire state of Georgia uses vulnerable tabulators, and some counties in the state continue to publish vulnerable data as of the most recent election this year. Georgia, in fact, announced recently that they wouldn't patch their systems until after the upcoming presidential election. We recommend that states should patch at a more regular interval and that they should budget for emergency patches if they need to. The third thing that I want to talk about is certification and testing and how this vulnerability came to exist in the first place. Now, DVSorder doesn't stand alone. It's part of more than 20 years of security researchers warning that broken random number generators threaten voter privacy. This is the sort of thing the regulators should have been aware of. They should have been on the lookout for. But despite that, and despite the fact that federal and state governments require certification testing for election equipment, vulnerable Dominion scanners have passed testing over a dozen times. And this is partly because certification tests lack requirements for detailed coverage of potential privacy risks. We recommend rigorously testing for privacy, drawing on lessons from past vulnerabilities. Overall, we believe that DVSorder should be a wake-up call for voter privacy. How is it possible that in 2022, a leading voting system vendor thought it was appropriate to shuffle ballots using an LCG? Why didn't this raise red flags with regulators during any one of their dozen of certification reviews? And why can't jurisdictions as large as Georgia or as sophisticated as San Francisco patch these flaws even after they've known about them for years? If the right to a secret ballot is to mean anything, actors across the election sector must do their part to protect it. Thank you.